Hey, what's up? Welcome back to another video here on Freewheel Photos. I am going to start a new series today, and this series is really just going to be exploring ON1 with me. There's no script, and I'm really just kind of freestyling as I edit photos. I'm going to kind of talk through some things. These will likely be longer videos, so skip around as much as you want. But I really don't know where this video is going. I just wanted to kind of take you on a journey in ON1 looking over my shoulder. Now, if you find anything of interest in this particular video, then please let me know down in the comment section, or if you have questions about certain things, and I'll do my best to explain these throughout the series. But sometimes I just go over some things and maybe I'll assume that people know exactly what I'm talking about, but not always the case. And then lastly, if you want to help support this channel and you want to save some money over on the ON1 website, consider using my coupon code FreeWheelPhotos20. Now, let's jump into the edit. So I have a relatively simple and boring image, if you will. And that's actually what made me choose this, but it's also still life of a pair of work boots. And it kind of symbolizes, hard work at the end of the day. So I think that's kind of the idea that I want to go with. At the current moment, it looks pretty cinematic. So I like that. Maybe we'll keep that. Maybe we won't. Let's go ahead and start by adding Brilliance AI. So I'm just going to activate this and let ON1 think itself through here. And while it does that, I'm going to get a sip of coffee. The goal here is really just to bring a little bit more life into the image and see how ON1 Brilliance AI really thinks this image should be processed. And okay, so if I turn it off and turn it on, you can see what Brilliance AI is doing. Now, what I'm noticing here is I'm missing some detail in the boots, and I think that's due to the no noise AI. So let's go over here to noise and sharpening. You can see no noise is selected. It's all the way up to 100%. Now, I personally don't think that this image needs any noise reduction. So I'm just going to click on classic, and it'll take it back to essentially default settings that were already in the image. Now, if I wanted to, because I've noticed that sometimes people want to get the noise masked into certain areas. If I wanted to do that, then I could hit the duplicate button up here under my layers, and I can come to the top image or the bottom image. It doesn't really matter. For the sake of organization, I'm going to rename these. So now that I have the ability to put the no noise AI, I'm just going to click on my layer that I labeled no noise AI. I do recommend that you do this in your own workflows. It just helps you find things a little bit faster. I'm going to come down to noise and sharpening, add no noise AI, because I think that this is a phenomenal tool. It was just not doing what I needed to do in the boot area here. So let me zoom out a little bit. And now it looks like it's okay. It's still thinking down there at the bottom. So it's another coffee break time. Okay, so if it did anything, I'm not really seeing it. Yeah, let me zoom in, see if I can get this to render. There we go. Now you can see what it's done, and you could tell that it's actually done something because it's removed a lot of the information here. Now I could sit here and play around with no noise AI to figure out how I want to really try to get back that detail using the enhanced detail slider, but I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to apply it. And then once it applies, I'm going to put a mask on the layer, and then that's going to bring me to a more desirable outcome, I think. We'll see. Okay, so now that no noise AI is applied, I can come up to the layer, click on the mask, and then I'm just going to make this really rough because it's just noise reduction. So it's not like it's something that's going to blend like crazy harsh. So with a brush set to erase, I'm just going to make it relatively large so I don't have to spend too much time on this. I'm just going to erase this area that's right over the boots because that's where I want the detail. And you can see that it's bringing back that detail in the boots without me really having to play with any of the settings of No Noise AI, which is essentially what I want to do. And if you want to look at the mask, I'll hit the letter O, and that just brings us to the mask. You can see I'm missing that big gap in the middle, and that's right here. So I'll just come right down in here, and that should have closed that up pretty good. Yeah, and it doesn't have to be entirely perfect because I just really wanted to bring back the detail in the boots. And you may not even be able to perceive what is actually happening. But if I turn off this layer and turn it back on, you can see the sock here gets a little bit more bright. And overall, it's more smooth in the background. And I think that that's more desirable for me personally. Now, what I can do is merge these layers. Now, if you caught my previous video, I talked about using a merge visible option, but this time I personally want to use a stamped layer. All right, so I'm going to click the three line menu, and then instead of clicking merge visible, I'm going to click new stamped layer. ON1 is going to think through like how does it want to merge all of these and essentially give me a new image to work with that has both of these settings baked in. The No Noise AI on one, and then the original settings from the other are all on this one image. So now if I just turn those off, then I have these available, or I'm sorry, this image available to me to work on. And the benefit of working with a stamped layer versus a merge visible is I have access to these layers underneath. Now, personally, I probably don't need this No Noise AI layer anymore. And that's simply because, one, it's not the original. And two, it's not something that I think I'm going to go back to and re-edit. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this layer. You got to make sure you have the layer that you want to delete selected. And then I'll go to delete that layer. So now I have my original plus my layer that is this stamped layer. I'm going to remove this or rename this. So I'm just going to call it stamped layer. I think that that makes sense for my workflow and what I'm doing. Now that I have my layer renamed, I can go ahead and start working on the other items that I would like to do. So what's annoying me in this image is this string that's coming down here. I'm not sure what that's from. So let's just go ahead and fix the story in the image. Which is these boots are the primary focus, and I feel like this just distracts from it. So I'm going to use the perfect eraser here and make my brush just a little bit larger than the circumference or the dimensions of the string itself. So I'm just going to paint, and I'm going to paint relatively loose just to see what happens. And then I'll come all the way up here. And I am including some of the background space because I want ON1 to be able to look at all of the surroundings and come up with a good option to replace that with. So we'll see what ON1 comes up with. And if it doesn't work, then we'll try a different method because there are a few different ways to work with this. And it actually did a pretty good job. Now, I will note this is a destructive way of working. I can't get this information back and I can't unhide it or whatever, even though over here, if I turn off retouching, you can see it come back. So I guess it's a little misleading because once upon a time we didn't have access to that. Now that we do, you can at least turn it off and you can get the information back in that regard. But we're going to go ahead and paint over this area here. And as soon as you lift your mouse, ON1 renders. So I'm just going to paint a larger area and see if I can get that to kind of smooth out. I think what happened over the sock is fine, so I'm not going to worry about that. However, I did want to clean up this background, and I think that that looks great, right? So we went from having this string over here to no string, and I think it did okay with the sock, enough that no one's going to notice the difference, and I'm not overly concerned about it. It looks relatively natural, so we're going to keep moving. Another distraction that I have, even though it is a part of a house, and you could say that it's fine and leave it, but I'm going to try and get rid of this electrical outlet. So I'm going to make my brush just a little bit larger than the area that I'm working. It's probably too large, so I'll go like this and maybe wiggle on the outside just to pick up a little bit of extra space. I do this, like I said, because I think that it helps ON1 figure out what are the surrounding areas and blends it a little bit better. I could be completely wrong. It's just the technique that I use. So while that loads, let me get another sip of coffee. Okay, so I could work with this. I think I will make a spot correction here and then make another one over there. And I don't think too much attention is going to be in this area, so I'm not trying to make this area extremely perfect. And I think that that is something many people need to hear. You don't have to make all of your edits perfect, especially if the attention isn't going into that area. Now, this isn't me giving you license to be sloppy and lazy if there is a way that you could fix it. But sometimes it just makes sense to let things go. And then as long as it's generally cleaned up, you're going to be fine. Now, if you're submitting a photo to a competition, then yes, take your time and really work on that image to make sure that it's ready to go. But if you're just doing something that, for fun, like what I'm doing right now, don't overthink it. All right. Just enjoy the process and the editing. I guess the editing process. That's what I'm doing. So now I have my image pretty much cleaned up as much as I needed it to be cleaned up. So it's time to stylize the image. And I mentioned that this looks very cinematic. So in my mind, the first thing that I want to do is apply a LUT to the image. So I'm going to come over here to the effects, hit add filter, and I'm going to click on LUTs. Now, I may have some different LUTs than what you have available. Don't worry about that. Use the LUTs that you have available for yourself, and I think all should be well. Now, I'm going to go with a color grading LUT and see what I have in here for that. So I kind of like this LUT. So despondent, I think that's how you say that. Not sure. And I think this one actually comes with ON1. So a majority of us should have that, or everyone should have that. But I like to look through all of my LUTs before I make a complete decision or a final decision. Just to see if anything else stands out. I kind of like the orange tones that it applies to the boots on this particular LUT. So it's between, inside of color grading, it's between despondent and thorough you. Man, I'm about to butcher some names. But let's come over to ON1 LUT cinematic styles. Now, these ones are ON1 extras. So if you are a part of the ON1 Plus membership, then you should be able to go and download these if you haven't already. If you want to join that membership, you can use my coupon code and you will get a discount for that particular membership as well. So if that's something you're thinking about, then consider using that coupon code. With that being said, I don't know if these are This one's kind of cool. It goes with that grimy feel that I think I want to apply overall, but I'm not sure if that's the best grade. I also like this one. So 7 and 8 under cinema styles. And yeah, so for the sake of time, because I could sit here and be super indecisive, I think I'm going to go with number, you know what? I'm actually going to go back to color grading, and I'm going to go with the first one that I initially liked, which was Despondent. And I just like what it's doing to the overall texture in the image. It's just enhancing these boots and making them look a little bit more in your face vivid. All right. So I like that. However, it is a little strong. And there's a few ways that we can deal with adding this into the image. So the first way is just pulling down on the opacity and, just blending it in like so, as gradually as you need to. That's the first way. The other way that I think is probably a little bit more creative and could be beneficial for everyone to understand is you could apply a mask and you could use the luminosity option. All right. So I'm over here on my mask properties, or my filter properties is what it's called. And I'll just create a luminosity mask. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with luminosity masks, it's actually really easy to use, so don't be intimidated by it. Essentially, a picture is made up of dark pixels and bright pixels, all right? That's the tonal range. And what the luminosity mask does is it finds the dark pixels and the bright pixels, and it applies a mask by default on ON1. The brightest areas receive whatever the treatment is. Now, if you invert it, the darkest areas will receive whatever the treatment is. Let me show you that in real time. So if I hit the letter O, it looks like my image went black and white. But what it really did is it gave me a gradient or a grayscale showing me where the brightest pixels are that are receiving the in this case, the LUT effect, which is on this wall. And then in the darkest areas, it's actually hiding that effect. So it's not happening over here. So if I hit the letter O, and I'm just going to oversaturate this, I'm trying to make it like really, really noticeable. But that's not really helping as much. However, what we can do is start to modify this luminosity mask to really only fine tune where we want it in the image. The best way to do that is to hit the letter O, opening up the mask option, or I'm sorry, the mask overlay view. And then what we can do is use the window option. If I pull this window slider to the right, you can see that it starts to change the mask. And what it's doing is it's saying don't apply any of that LUT filter to the darkest pixels in your image. Instead, only apply them at the point in which we select it all the way up to the brightest pixel. Now, if you only want this adjustment in the midtones or the middle grays of your image, you can pull this back to just before it starts to transition into that gray zone over here in the layer properties. And then you can pull your brightest points down to where it's just inside of that middle gray area. So now the LUT is only being applied to these tones in your image. This is actually really good to know because when we modify and edit things, knowing which tones we're applying our adjustments to helps us be a little bit more creative and really fine tune our edits overall. Now, sometimes it'll result in what I call a really splotchy mess of a mask. And that's just not how we naturally see things in real life. All right. So what I recommend everyone does is apply a feather to that mask. And what it does is essentially blurs those edges so it blends better into the image. And the more I pull this feather, you can see the separation of the brightest pixels to the darkest pixels. And that's actually what we want to be able to see in our image. And it gives a better representation of where this effect is going. Based off of this mask, we can tell that inside of the image, the dark areas of the boot are not going to receive any of that masking, or I'm sorry, any of that LUT, but the LUT is going to go on the background here as well as everywhere else. All right. I know that that was a long explanation, but hopefully it was helpful. Now, let's see what that does to the image if I turn it off and turn it on. And you can see it just makes this wall go from being a green color, which I probably should have corrected in the original image since that is a color cast, but it is what it is at this point. We're just going to roll with it. But looking at it now, that is really just impacting the background, the wall here. So the cool thing about this though, is we can add more filters on top of this. So if I go to add filter and I go back to LUTs, now you remember I also enjoyed having the one that started with a T, whatever this is. I don't know how to say that. But look at what parts of the boot, like I really just like this around the boot. I didn't really care for it anywhere else. I don't like that it's making this area over here green. So what I can do now is click on the mask filter, come over here, invert this mask. And if I click on paint, or you could do a keyboard shortcut of Shift plus X or Shift and X, I'll make my brush size a little bit larger, and I'm just going to paint this effect into the boots because I think it looks really good on the boots. I'm not a huge fan of what it did elsewhere. And this doesn't have to be perfect because I'm going to also feather this mask, even though I should be using, yeah, it's 100% feather on the brush as well. So this isn't even giving me a hard edge, so I may not need to feather. So we'll just keep moving through like so. And let's hit the letter O, see what our mask is. I'll just go and clean up these little areas here. Yeah. So now, if I turn this off and turn it on, you can see I just applied that to the boots. I'm not a huge fan of the blue tone that's coming through. So what I'll do is probably just pull down on the saturation just a little bit. And I'm going to come over to my blending option for this LUT. And I'm going to select one of these other blend modes or blend options. Let's see. I probably want one of the, yeah, we probably want one of the, no, guess we don't want one of those. That's not going to look very good. So maybe a blend option won't work. And that's actually a good point to kind of make here. I wonder what luminosity does. And if I turn this off, turn it on, it just darkens those boots, but it doesn't give me any of that color. It just gives me the more dark, gritty look. So, and I kind of wanted that color. So what I'm going to do is just come back to normal, and I am going to reduce the opacity and pull this saturation back down. Yeah, I think something like this looks appropriate for the grade on the boots. I think that that works pretty well. So now the next thing that I'll probably do, now that I have my LUTs here, is let's add some more grit to the image. And the filter that I would use to do that is the grunge filter. Now, I don't know how frequently people use this filter. I use it sparingly, but I'd love to know how often you use it down in the comment section, if at all. Now, with the grunge filter, it can come across as pretty aggressive and strong. So this is purely one of those things that a little goes a long way. Now, I don't want this picture to get like crazy dark. Now, for the cinematic image that I had in my mind, I think it can be a little bit darker, but not too dark. Then, of course, I'm just going to increase the details. And I feel like I only need this on the boots. Now, instead of me using a brush and trying to paint this in and make it perfect around the edges and stuff like that, what I'm going to do now is actually open up the mask, come up here to the masking bug, and I'm going to use a center option. I'm just going to click and drag or drop that in. And I think I actually need the edges. I always get these confused. Let me know if anyone else gets those confused in the comment section. Let me hit the letter O, make sure. Yeah, okay. Just making sure that I'm applying the effect to the middle of this masking option. And then once I have it applied, what I'm going to do is just drag this feather out. So, and I probably need to make it a little bit larger for the boots. So that way they're inside of the actual oval here, the center oval, because 100% of the effect is happening inside of here. And then literally, I guess 0 or 100 to 0 happens with this grade in between here. And then none of the effect happens on the outside of this particular mask. So this is the reason why I like using radio filters. It's just easy to get stuff in target, I guess, if you will. So now if I turn this off and turn it on, you can see the grunge filter. It's just really being applied inside of here as opposed to the entire image. And I think that that works pretty well. So now that I have grunge, I have LUTs, what else can I do to make this image make sense? I think there's two more things that I could do. The first one, I think, is applying a border, and we'll see if the letterbox option, let me just go ahead and make those properties go down or like minimize. I think it's under film, maybe. And then I feel like there's a letterbox option in here. And if it's not in there, then maybe it is under simple actually. And yeah, so it was under simple. And then we'll just select letterbox. And to me, this is like the mark of cinema, if you will. Because all of our movies, or at least the movies I watch, they have these letterboxes on them. Now, I'll just go ahead and pull this down to scale it down because I don't need that scale like crazy. And I don't know why this is such a, and maybe we'll pull to fit the image, but now we're losing detail on the sides there. So let's see if we can, you know, I feel like we should have been able to get this like thinner on the letterbox, and repositioning this isn't really going to, you know what, let's do fit to canvas, and I don't know. Yeah, that's not going to do much of anything. Okay. Well, plan B, because there's another plan or another way that we can apply a letterbox. All right. So what we're going to do is come up here to the solid color fill layer. All right. Click on the bucket, and I want this to be black. So I'm going to hit OK, and it's going to go over the top of our image. And now what I can do is lower the opacity so I could see through just enough. I don't need to be able to see like a whole lot. And then what we can do is click on the mask option here, and we're going to punch a hole through this mask. But I am going to use, I'm going to show you two ways. All right. The gradient mask, we can use that and just pull it up. Oh, wrong mask. Let's go to gradient. Thought that's what I selected, but clearly I didn't. Yeah. Okay. And then we can just pull this down to make it a very, very harsh transition. And I'm trying to now move it. And of course, when you try to move it and the bar is right there, makes it really, really hard to do. So I'm going to move it first to about there. I think that'll be good. And get it to like so. And then I am going to hit, or you know what? I got the wrong gradient. We need a reflected gradient for this. Sorry. So the reason why we need a reflected gradient is because I need to be able to move this mask to both sides of the image. All right. If I use the regular gradient, it wouldn't work. So reflected allows me to do stuff like this. And I'll have to come back and make that a little bit more tidy, but I'm not sure if that is where I want the line yet or not. But now if I increase the opacity, you can see I have letterboxes on my image. Now, obviously the one down here at the bottom, it is more transitioned or feathered. So we'll just pull that a little bit closer together on the line. And with this option, it's really hard to get a very, very straight line, but it allows me to come back and readjust the overall size and reposition. So this is the benefit of having this type of mask or letterbox, if you will. And then, of course, I'll just rename this. So that way I know that that's my letterbox. And I think that that works. All right. So that's the first way that I would show you on doing the letterbox. Let's go ahead and duplicate this really quickly. And I'm going to turn off the bottom one. And then we'll come to the mask and we will reset the mask. So now I have the blank slate or the black layer all over again. I'm just going to bring the opacity down so I can see through. And the second way that you can create the letterbox, if this is an effect that you want to do, is you can use the line mask tool. Now, I know that I talk about the line mask tool very sparingly, but it is a really good tool that you can use. So what I'm going to do is click on the outside, hold shift, and I should have made a straight line, but it didn't. Interesting. Well, nonetheless, I'm going to click and make a relatively straight line, as straight as I can make it by eyeballing it. And then, of course, I'll click to close that. And what I can do, I want to paint in this black effect. So I want to click on paint and then click on the inside of the blue line. But I want to reduce my feather all the way down to 0 so I get that straight edge. So I'll go ahead and click. And I'm not sure what happened. Okay, let's try it. Okay. So we'll go ahead and work with erase instead. And then I'm going to do the same thing down at the bottom. So I'll click on the outside, come all the way across, making it as straight as I can, come down here, come down here and close that off. And we'll click inside to erase. So we'll hit done to say that this did what we expected it to do. And I'll click on the mask again. Obviously, it's backwards from what I want. So I'm just going to hit invert, and it's going to give me my letterboxes. So those are two ways. This second method is okay. I think that if you really need to get like two different sizes and or whatever, maybe you need to do something a little bit more particular, then the line mask tool could be the option that you use instead. That's going to be completely up to you. But for me, I think that the best letterbox method is the reflected gradient, because I can always come back and modify this. So if I say, you know, I actually wanted this to be up a little bit higher and bring this down a little bit lower, it's so much easier for me to modify this, even though I could go back and modify the other one as well. But I got to do that a little bit in a more time-consuming way, personally. So what else can I do to this image now that I have my letterboxes and everything else in place? Well, I think that we can deal with some lighting. Now, I probably should have started with lighting, but I just started going and working on the image. But we should probably do a little bit of lighting. And what I'm noticing is the shadow is being cast onto the wall in this direction. So that means our light is likely coming somewhere like so. All right. One of the ways that I like to work with light is inside of the local adjustments, especially when I'm trying to modify and manipulate it. All right. One of my favorite ways of doing this is grabbing a line mask tool, and because I can see where the shadow is, what I want to do is click just outside of there, and then I just make like a beam. We'll go like so. And we know it's a relatively large light source because of the way that it is being cast. And we'll work on this back end. So I'm going to do something like that. All right. It looks a little odd, but what I can do is I am going to, I think it's painted on this side. Yeah. That way I'm putting the effect over here. Now I'm doing the opposite of putting light into the image, but just bear with me. And then what I'm going to do is grab this little centerpiece and just make like an edge, right? Because even though there's shadow over there, there's still light in that area. All right. It's not as much, but there's still light in that area. And we're going to correct that here in a little bit, as you will see. So now what I want to do is grab my feather, and I want to feather this 100% because there's no harsh edges to our light as we see it, unless it's being flagged by something. All right. So that should be good. I'm going to go ahead and hit the check mark. That should close that mask for me. There we go. And now I can pull up on my exposure to brighten up this area just a touch. And I mean, that by itself actually looks pretty good. I actually like what it's doing there, just a little bit, not gonna lie. But we'll open up the shadows a little bit, and we will also increase the whites, and that's just helping bring in some of that cinematic overall look. And I hate saying the word cinematic over and over, but it's the truth. And then I'll just contrast this a little bit as well. I think that that's going to look pretty good. And yeah, so we'll just rename this. And now what I need to do is fix everything else around here. So I'm going to hit add adjustment. And I am going to open up this adjustment here. And, I'm just going to copy this mask because that's one of the benefits of working in ON1. You get to copy your mask. So I'm going to hit copy. And then I am going to paste this mask. Keeps me from having to do some extra work. So I'll paste that mask. And then I'm going to invert it because I want to work on the opposite side of that mask, like so. Now you could see that light effect that we painted in way more dramatically. And I don't want it to be like that drastic. So I'm going to bring the exposure back up. And I'm actually going to feather this mask a whole lot more. So it just blends better into that area that it's already selected. Okay. So now what I can do is bring down the midtones because in this shadowed area, I feel like this makes sense to have the midtones brought down. Maybe even bring down the shadows since I'm trying to make that area a little bit darker, and even pull down on the blacks. And then a trick that I like to do is I like to desaturate my shadows whenever I'm trying to make something look more, I guess, faded, if you will. So I'm just going to pull down just a very little bit. Like it's not a whole lot. It's more of a perceivable thing than it is like a visible, like, oh yeah, look, that's a desaturated area. It's more like, okay, there's not really anything to see over there. All the colors over here. So your eye just sees it and then it jumps back over to the colored area or the area where the color is. All right. And then of course, blending this in as smoothly as I can, probably do something like that. And when it comes to light, blend modes are always your friend, or at least I've found that they're my friend. And I'd probably put an overlay or a soft light approach on this one, but I don't like the banding that I'm getting up there at the top. So maybe wonder what pin light does. Nothing that I can see. So we'll leave it at normal. It wasn't my friend today, but that's why we're exploring ON1, because believe it or not, guys, this is how I edit photos. I just sit here and I think of things and I say, I want to try that. And so I'm bringing you along for the journey of that. So now I think that's pretty good. I haven't been doing it frequently, but here's what we kind of started with our stamped layer. This is after we did the noise reduction and everything of that sort. And here's where we've come so far. And I think that this is actually pretty good. It's hitting that cinematic vibe that I was going for. The only thing that I feel like this is missing now is actually a little bit of grain. Like I feel like there needs to be some film grain. So we'll hit add filter, go to film grain, and maybe even a glow effect. I just seen glow and I was like, man, that would probably be pretty good on here. And I'm not entirely sure which grain. I think I'll go with this one. And I feel like that does help a little bit. You can really see it over here in the background, and it just helps tie this picture in with everything else that's going on. But let's see what the glow does, because I feel like the glow could be fun. Now I want to put it under the grain because I don't want those individual pieces of grain picking up on the glow. And the glow does actually help a little bit. Let's play with the blend modes down here just to see if any of these, yeah. So this multiply one really does help, I think, but I think we'll keep it at soft light and just lower the opacity of this as well. and turning it off and turning it back on, you could just see it really like starts to bring things cohesively together. And let's see, I feel like now it needs a texture, and there's textures, and I feel like the texture, yeah, it could be under the film grain. That's fine. So let's take a look and see. I feel like there was a texture for like film scratches, and I could be wrong. I wonder if it's under photographic. And I could be thinking of a different software as well. Scratch film. That looks too much. And then that looks like way too crazy as well. So I would really have to mask that in. Not filling that. Nope. This isn't too bad. I don't like the edges though. You know, maybe we can work with that. And then I can come over to transform. It's hidden, or it is collapsed. And I'll just pull up on the scale. Let that be a little bit larger. And we'll pull down on the opacity for the subtleness of this particular texture. And pull down the opacity so it really does blend now. So here's what we really started with, and this is, you know, relatively decent image. And then here's what we've gotten to with, you know, a little bit of exploration, some idea of what could be possible, and then exploring it, seeing if it is something that comes out good on the picture. Hopefully this drill and this series will be inspiring to many of you who are wondering, like, okay, well, what do I even do with a photo when I get it into ON1? Because my goal here in this particular series is really just to show you that you don't have to have it all figured out, and you don't have to be perfect at the software. You just got to get in and start playing with things and seeing, you know, asking questions of what can I do to edit a photo? And that's honestly what I do. Now, I have been using ON1 for a few years, so I'm familiar with what tools are inside of it. But if you are new to ON1, then my recommendation, just start with the develop. All right, tone and color, Brilliance AI, all of this stuff right here is going to be good for you to get familiar with, and just start modifying that. And then after that, jump into local adjustments and start adding some of these exposure items, right? If you come over to local, you'll see that you'll have literally all of the same tone and adjustment and color sliders and everything else that you had here in develop. But the benefit of local is you can paint those in certain areas. So now you become the artist. All right. And then once you have mastered those two tabs, I think that it's the next logical step is to jump into effects and just start playing with them. Like you're not going to mess up your photo. And even if you did, you could just delete that effect or turn it off. So have fun. I think that myself, YouTube has made photo editing like this scientific thing that if it's not this way, then it ought to be not considered or something. And I'm included in that sometimes. But that's not my intent. That's not my heart. That's not my goal. My goal is to keep people inspired and keep them creating. So that's why I wanted to start this series. Let me know what you think about this. Let me know your thoughts on, you know, what you experience when you're editing, and we'll go from there. Until next time, I want you guys to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.